A question I am often asked is, Rabbi, what is a more important and compelling Jewish value? To be a kind, compassionate, and generous human being, to be moral and ethical, and love of our fellow, or to be a religious and pious individual, to love God and to work on my relationship with the Almighty. While both of those are important, they are both in the Torah, teaches us V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, in our holiest prayer of the Shema. We are commanded to love God and to accept God's dominion in our lives and to follow the Torah and the commandments. And we are also told V'ahavta l'recha kamocha in the book of Leviticus, to love our fellow as ourselves. The question is, can they both always go together? And does one have supremacy over the other in its inherent value? While different rabbis may give different answers, my response would be, let us see how God himself answers the question in the Torah. In this week's Torah portion, we find two cataclysmic stories that define the nature of our Torah portion. The first and more famous is the story of the flood of Noach, where God instructs Noach to build an ark and to bring his family in because he's about to destroy a world gone awry, where generations of human beings with absolute cruelty to each other devastated their world. And God says there is no option but to do a full rewrite, to bring the universe back to its origins, to submerge it in water, and to bring a new universe out of it, a new type of human being, of which the 7 Noahide laws would be the moral code for civilization to be able to coexist. The second story, perhaps less famous, occupies a total of 9 verses in the end of the Torah portion, tells a story that happened in the aftermath of this flood. The survivors of this flood congregate in a valley, and they attempt to build a tower known as the Tower of Babel. One of the impulses of this tower, aside from creating high ground or creating a protection against future destruction, our sages tell us there was a more nefarious purpose. One of its purposes was to try to elevate themselves all the way to the heavens, where they thought that they would find and meet their adversary, the one who vanquished their world just a short time before, and to do battle with God himself, and once and for all, put an end to the threat and the fear of future apocalypses and destructions. What is fascinating is God's response to these two events. In the event of that transpired leading up to the flood, God says, I regret that I created mankind because the inherent impulse and nature of human beings to behave this way caused God great dissatisfaction and great sadness. And therefore he felt that he had no choice but to destroy the world that he built with love and created out of compassion and to start all over again. Whereas the story of the Tower of Babel, God introduces an interesting consequence to a rebellious group of people who want to do battle with him. He gives them the proverbial slap on the wrist, and maybe not even that. He introduces this concept of multiple languages and disbursement. Rather than punishing them and harming them, he merely spreads them out and gives them multiple modes of expression that they can no longer communicate effectively with each other, and thus this project was abandoned. But one wonders, why is it that one story gets such a heavy-handed response, whereas the story of the Tower of Babel, an open rebellion against God, gets a shrug of the shoulder and a response that doesn't seem consistent with the intention of the people who were building the tower in the first place. And here we are introduced to the grandeur and the magnanimous nature of the Almighty, of God, of how he interacts with the universe and the people human beings that he created. As Rashi so poignantly points out at the end of the Parsha, come and see how important peace and love is. For in the story of the Tower of Babel, God does not punish them harshly. He merely confuses them and spreads them out. Whereas in the story of Noach, he destroys the entire civilization. Because while the two stories share some qualities, the main difference, Rashi points out, is that in one, the former, in Noach's time, all of humanity was apart. They were fighting, they were quarreling, they were robbing, stealing, and murdering each other. They could not get together. When human beings cannot come together in harmony and in unity, when we don't see the I and the we in each other, there is no civilization, there is no world to speak of. In the second episode, all of humanity did come together, albeit for a negative purpose, to fight God, but at least they came together. And here he points out the sublime nature of this endeavor caused God in some level some joy, some satisfaction. At least they can have peace within them for something. And this teaches us the power and the effect that we must always chase peace, pursue peace. Because even if human beings are living peacefully with each other, and even if we are not 100% religious or observant, and our relationship with God is not what it's meant to be, and even if there are times in our lives that we are rebellious to God, but if God sees that we are harmonious and that we love our fellow, and we do everything we can to live peacefully with our fellow, God gives us second, third, and fourth chances. But if our compelling narrative is that I can love God, I respect God, I'm religious, I'm observant, I'm very, very pious in my relationship to God, but I cannot stand my fellow is my enemy, I cannot stand human beings, God says that's not a world that can exist. As a matter of fact, someone who says that they love God but they hate people is a liar. Because our sages, our mystics teach us that loving of our fellow actually is more supreme than love of God. From the story and from the nature of our Torah portion, it becomes clear what God prefers. God prefers a society of people who live harmoniously with each other, even if they are quote-unquote anti-religious, to a society of people who are very God-fearing and maybe meticulously observant spiritually, but are evil and are not compassionate and don't show any concern, and obviously, even worse, take advantage of their fellow person. That warrants a flood, whereas the Tower of Babel, merely a slap on the wrist. My friends, Ahavat Hashem and Ahavat Yisrael, love of God and love of our fellow, they are both important. We have the 10 commandments, 5 on each side, teach us that each one is representing our connection to God, and one is representing our connection to our fellow human beings. We need to have both in our lives. We need to have that balance. But ultimately, the theme of our Torah portion is that a world in which we do not emphasize that our concern and our compassion for our fellow must come first, must come before even our relationship to Torah. As our sages pointed out, derech eretz kadmala Torah. To be a mensch, to be a good human being must come even before we begin our journey into Torah. May God bless us as we say, Oseh shalom b'mamav. If we want to make peace in heaven, Yaseh shalom aleinu v'al Yisrael. There must be peace with us and with all Jews and with all people around the world. If there's no peace here on earth, we cannot bring peace to heaven. We cannot bring peace between us and God. If we have love and peace here, then even the towers of Babel, even the events in our lives that bring us difficulty and bring us friction between us and the spiritual aspect of ourselves, between us and God, can always be rectified as long as our relationship with our fellow remains intact. Shabbat Shalom.